What's next for IT? In today's economy, technology touches every aspect of the day-to-day operations of business. There has never been more pressure on IT to deliver for our organizations. So what can we expect over the next decade? We need to think differently about how we approach our work to continue to thrive into the future. This requires all of us to be intentional in how we look at our role going forward. Smart IT is an approach to getting the important things done by transforming the way we think, work, and lead. And now, let's disrupt the status quo, simplify the complex, and reduce risk the smart IT way. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Smart IT Podcast. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Christal to the show. Good afternoon, Christal. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad that you took some time out on a Friday afternoon to hang out with me. Good way to end the week here to talk a little EA today.
Yeah, that's exciting. I'm really excited. Want to talk a lot about my practical experience, not the academic experience, but the practical experience of EA. Got a lot of things to share. I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah, this is EA, as everybody knows, is enterprise architecture. So it's a fun topic. Not a lot of people in IT necessarily know about it so much as a profession. They may have heard about it. Maybe they've interacted with somebody in their enterprise who knows about it. So I always love having EAs come on the show to kind of share their experiences and the value of EA, the impact it has for making use of all this great technology we have to give organizations and the government the tools they need to do what they need to do. So let's start off with your origin story, Christal. And so you're obviously in the federal space, but let's get a little background on your journey into the EA world.
Yeah, I've got about 23 years, a little bit over 23 years of EA experience. My first 10 years of my career, I worked on the DoD Business Enterprise Architecture Program. I was 7 years as a contractor and 3 years as a GS-15 Chief Technical Architect, overseeing the implementation of that program. That was an amazing program. We had over 187 architects, subject matter experts working on putting together the DoD Business Enterprise Architecture that currently exists today. It was amazing. It was the world's largest enterprise architecture program at that time. And we just had some amazing people brought together from all different walks of life, all different companies. And what you have today is the result of that work. And then I worked on the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs Enterprise Architecture for 6 years. I worked on that in the very beginning, the infancy of that EA program. I have some funny stories to share about that because, when you have a very limited amount of resources, you find innovative ways to get around things, to get things stood up and deliver things really quickly. But absolutely loved working on that program. And then after that, I began working on a solution architecture for US MEPCOM, which is US Military Entrance Processing Command. That was a solution architecture for US MERS. And that was my first EA program where I actually did solution architecture work, did process simulation. So business process reengineering, Lean Six Sigma, and process simulation. That was amazing. We have a lot of different uses for that architecture, and I could talk to you more about what we did for that program. And then after that, I went to the Department of Navy, worked there a couple years, worked on their architecture, which is a segment architecture. That is the architecture that sits below the DoD Business Enterprise Architecture. And then finally, I'm here now at Medicare Medicaid. I've been working on this program for 4 years. I absolutely love this program. They're doing some really innovative things, and the client is really thinking outside the box about how to build EA, how to use EA, actually how to identify cost savings and shared capabilities across the federal government. That's pretty much my career.
I love that. You mentioned some interesting key words there. We talk about lean, business process reengineering, EA. When you talk about those things, this is kind of a great way to segue for some of the technical audience who may be hands on keyboard all the time, right?
Right.
and they don't necessarily see what is all the infrastructure, the coding, what does it all mean from a business or organizational standpoint, and in your case for the government, right?
Mm-hmm,
So you
mm-hmm.
mentioned some big organizations there like Medicaid and military Defense Department of Defense.
Mm-hmm,
So it has some
mm-hmm.
big impact for lots of people. So
Right,
let's
right.
talk about EA's role in supporting um, systems that a lot of people rely on.
Right. So I could talk about it for just from a generality perspective. For enterprise architectures, it's a great way to identify requirements that you want standardized across your department or agency to implement in systems. So, for example, if you have infrastructure requirements or if you have data standards or interoperability standards for these systems, you want to build them in your enterprise architecture as a requirement. And then the agency uses that enterprise architecture as a form of compliance. So when a system is coming through and getting approval for funding, they have to adopt those, or they have to review those requirements and making sure that they're implementing those requirements in their systems. And then once the system gets implemented, it gets validated to make sure that those requirements got implemented, right? So that's that whole, guiding and constraining system implementation, and, NIST standards, industry standards as a whole. It's really great to make sure that you're really implementing what the agency requires. We specifically
Yeah.
focused on that at DoD, which is included as part of their business capability lifecycle process or their acquisition lifecycle process, where they're required to use the enterprise architecture as a starting point for requirements, build it into their solution, and then it gets validated.
I love that. And then you
Mm-hmm.
also mentioned a little bit earlier about cost, right? So
Right,
when
right.
cost is always a concern, no matter if you're in the government or on the private side of the house. So let's talk about EA's role in helping to either control or help contain cost overall.
Yeah. So one of the primary, so let's talk about costs in two different manners. Okay. Costs with respect to EA as a program and how you use EA as part of your agency. We primarily use EA for doing portfolio management and identifying redundancies or cheaper solutions that are out there that could be implemented. So if a new system, if a new organization comes up and they want to go ahead and implement a new system, they have to actually go out and check their inventory of systems to see what systems are out there that have that similar capability. So then they can determine, does that system meet the needs that I have, and they can reuse that system or become a user of that existing system, right? Or they can reuse the capability of that system. So that's one area that we are promoting cost savings by using the architecture to identify opportunities for reuse. Also, if you want to identify cheaper costs, like we use Technopedia to identify different software that's out there in industry, COTS products that identify capabilities. So if you want to go out there and if you want to see, like, I want to have a financial management system that does dispersing, you can go out there and you can check Technopedia and see what kind of systems are out there that do that kind of have that functionality. And you have the full set of COTS products. So it's a very, very powerful tool to use. So you not only get what industry has, but you can also see the inventory that you have within your own organization.
Be
That
powerful.
makes sense?
It does.
Yeah. So from a cost savings from an EA program perspective, right? We as a contractor that supports my client, we are always looking on the program to see where we can kind of streamline as a program. So one of the examples that we did is that, we were using a tool that was very labor intensive, required a lot of configuration changes, licenses were very expensive, and it really didn't meet the customer's needs. So what we did is we went out and really documented what the customer really wanted, and then we did a full-blown out tool assessment. And as a result of that tool assessment, we were actually able to save the EA program itself $1.8 million.
Oof.
So they took
Nice.
that $1.8 million and they were actually able to reinvest that money in other areas of the program, right? So that's just that right there, just from that perspective, it's tremendous and reinvesting in the program where you can innovate, do constant innovation, right? We do a lot of lessons learned. We even do business process reengineering within the programs to make the processes much tighter. And so we're not doing a lot of labor intensive work on the program. So yeah, those are just some examples on the EA program itself, what we're doing cost savings.
Okay. And a couple of times you mentioned EA programs.
Yeah.
So when we start to think about, someone has an EA program out there and they want it to be successful, what are some of the things that that program should focus in on?
Yeah. So this is pretty close, dear and near to my heart, because I've worked on many EA programs before in the past. And one of the things that, the client really needs to focus in on is use cases for the architecture. Okay. What is a use case for one architecture in one agency may not be appropriate or applicable to another agency. So what you want to do is you want to focus in on things like business problems that the organization is having. Okay. So for example, if you know you're having data issues at your organization or you're having interoperability issues within your organization, maybe one of the things you want to do is implement a compliance process, document the data standards within your architecture, and then you can then use that as a way to validate some of the interoperability requirements that you have. That's very, very focused. I have another example where we want to make sure that the systems are complying with the laws, policies, regulations, and guidance of the organization, right? So one of the things that we've done is specifically, what we did it at DoD very successfully, but we are also doing it here at CMS. So at DoD, we downloaded the laws, regulations, policies, and guidance. We went ahead and had subject matter experts review that information, and then we would take the laws, policies, and regulations and map them to functions or processes. Okay. So that when you map them to processes and you click on a process step, you can see, this process step is constrained by this law, policy, or regulation, right? So if something happens later in the year or 2 years or 3 years where that law, policy, regulation changes, you can actually do an impact assessment to see what processes are impacted if I change that law.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So that process at DoD was very labor intensive. And so we had 8 architects just solely responsible for doing the laws, policies, and regulations, maintaining them in the repository, and then working with the subject matter experts to map them. So now, going through this process over and over on each EA program, and now with a big focus on AI, now we're utilizing AI to help us do the heavy lifting on the mapping. Right. So we no longer need 8 resources, right, to actually do the validation and the actual mapping. We utilize machine learning to help decipher based on the metadata of the architecture. If I have this law, I pull this law, policy, or regulation out of the Federal Register, I put it in my repository, and using machine learning, it can then automatically map based on the metadata that law, policy, or regulation to a function or a process.
Well, I can imagine being very useful if you're thinking about some new legislation and different variations.
Right,
and keep coming back to you like, hey, Christal, one congressman got some new input. It's going to change the regulation in this way. What impact that might have.
Right. Absolutely. And especially in the healthcare industry, there's a lot of changes that are going on, especially when a new administration comes in, there's always a revisit of, new policies, new regulations, new laws about healthcare. And so we want to be able to quickly go through and say, these are the processes, these are the systems that will be impacted. So, will those systems be able to function with that new law, policy, and regulation, or do I need a modernization to that system to be able to support that new law, policy, or regulation? Does that make sense?
It does, because it's like if it requires modernization, that's more dollars.
More money. Yeah, right.
And that money
Right.
could skyrocket and produce an unexpected outcome for someone, the policymaker, like, whoa, I didn't realize we're going to have that type of impact.
Right.
Yeah.
And the great thing is you're doing it in the beginning. So you're using the architecture to help you do that analysis to potentially provide that impact assessment back to senior leadership at the Medicare and Medicaid, and then they can make a decision to Congress about what they want to do with the laws.
Informed decision making, support,
right,
scale,
right.
The things that actually run the system and in a timely manner, which are all critical pieces, right?
Right, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so AI does have some usefulness as an addition to a new tooling.
Yeah. And then, and especially, you need to make sure that whatever tool you're getting or you're utilizing, has some built-in AI features like ChatGPT, which the tool that we're using, Prolaborate, has that implemented in it. So someone can go in and just simply ask a question in ChatGPT, and then it'll give you all the results that you're looking for in the architecture to help answer that question. Right?
Nice.
Yeah.
Are there some other additional tooling that you found that from an EA standpoint that's been helpful for you in your career?
Yeah, I will tell you, we have done, so over the years, I've done 5 major EA tool implementations with my team. And during that time, over the years, you kind of, build on the lessons learned, right? The pain of over that time over implementing systems. And I think this year with CMS, we were able to devise a very good tool assessment approach on how to select the right tool for your organization. And so one of the things that we did was we really sat down and invested time with the customer to really identify requirements that would be applicable to the tools, their use cases, what kind of questions they want answered, who are going to be the users, just a whole host of questions. And the shortcut to all this is that we used requirements from other EA programs, pulled them over as a starting point.
So leveraging previous work. Yeah.
Right. And so that saved us time, right? That saved us approximately 2 months worth of time reusing requirements from other tool assessments. Okay. And then we just simply had the government go through those requirements and validate whether that was applicable to what they wanted. Right. Then we would have these things called design sprint sessions. And our customers are very visually focused. So we would use something like Mural to help show them, this is what you currently have as far as a product is concerned. So if you want to see like a system interface diagram, okay, this is what your current version is. And then we take screen snapshots of all the different vendor tools that they are focusing on. And then we show them the difference. Okay. So this is what it looks like in Cameo. This is what it looks like in Sparks. This is what it looks like in, System Architect. And then we show them side by side. And then we go through the strengths and weaknesses of each. And then they select it. And then we move on. So it's a very methodical process. And then once they have all that identified, then we go through and we have the vendors, we send the tool assessment. It's essentially an Excel spreadsheet. Okay. And they essentially go through and they rate whether their system supports that requirement. Okay. And then if they, there's a scoring system, of course, of how they assess. So they all go through and assess, and then they'll send it back to us. Okay. And then once we get it back, we have a third-party person who's very experienced in many EA vendor tools go through and validate that. Because everybody has their own interpretation of what that requirement is. And we even provide them definitions, like what is an out-of-the-box capability, what requires configuration, what requires customization, right? And even then we get,
some variability.
So the third-party person comes back and says, this is what my review was. These are some of the issues with the assessment. You need to go back to the vendor and validate. So we go back, we validate. Now we feel like we have a really good comprehensive tool assessment. And then after that, then we get them to do a demonstration. So each vendor does a demonstration based on a script that we come up with. and each vendor has the same script. And then they have to show us exactly how the tool works on the things that we are focused on. Okay. So that we're making sure that we're seeing the exact same thing in each tool so we can do an apples to apples compare.
Okay. So the post will let them randomly come in and give us a generic demo, generic capability. No, we're going to set the stage here. Same requirements, same use cases.
Absolutely.
Let's see what you get. I love that.
Yeah. And then after we did that, the government participated in the demonstrations, and they were given a questionnaire. They filled out the questionnaire about what they thought about the tool. And then all that information then was brought together. And then we got a cost assessment or pricing from each vendor about how much the cost was for the certain amount of licenses, supporting certain types of framework. We got all that pricing information. And once we collected all that information together, then we got the tool assessment finalized and proposed it back to the government. And they were very ecstatic about the results because it wasn't what they expected, right? What they expected is they were going to get the most expensive tools, the real slick tools. And really, in the end, they didn't really need all those added features, right? So what they ended up choosing was actually the cheapest tool. And so they took all that money with the cost savings, and then they took it and reinvested it in something else.
Well, we should that's very powerful because this is a very, very common challenge, right? So, whereas all this extra features we don't need, there's so many vendors out there providing solutions, and that whole process of making sure they're meeting the requirements, they're not adding extra to it and comparing is a huge, huge process.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not like you found a way to actually put some rigor into it up front, and really come out to what exactly do I need? Do I need this add-on? How much customization do I need? What is out of like you said, you're defining what out of the box means. Right.
And really the driving force for I'll speak specifically to Medicare and Medicaid, to CMS. Their requirement was they wanted to have a modeling tool, but they also wanted to have a visualization tool that could provide context to business users on architecture data. So, for example, I want to see a series of architecture information, but not in a model format. I want to see it in dashboards, pie charts, graphs, reports, that kind of stuff. And the strength, the challenge for them was that they wanted to have one data source, one repository, where where that information was actually fed into two applications. That there wasn't all this extra API work that had to be done to do that work, that it was strictly one single repository, and they had a visualization tool, and then they had a modeling tool. And that was really the strongest selling point about that tool that they selected. They selected Sparks EA and Collaborate.
Okay.
And the project was so successful. And we did a massive transition from the legacy repository or the legacy EA tool to the new tool, and implemented, I think it was 23 APIs in 8 months. So total data migration, total model migration, API implementation. We did some dashboard development, all in a matter of 8 months, and that's almost unheard of.
Yeah.
I
could take 8 months for some people, just some requirement gathering by itself.
Yeah. But like I said, you figure out how to reuse some of the great work. I've got 23 years of experience. Many people on my team had a lot of years of experience. We pulled our resources together, worked with our former clients, and brought that information together to our current client. We've created relationships and maintained those relationships, and then introduced them to our current clients. So now on the federal level, the federal government architects are now building relationships and sharing capabilities.
And that's a thing that we expected, like, I guess in the past, where you said, I'm hiring an expert, but it's not like they may be starting from scratch.
Right.
Whoa, what's going on here? I think you have insights, experience, tooling to help speed along this process. And then sometimes when you don't get it, that leads to frustration. It's like, wow, what's going on here?
Yeah, yeah,
So like with you guys were able to really bring that real expertise. We say 20 plus years,
yeah,
and we got advanced new tooling,
yeah.
and we're bringing those pieces together. We're considering cost, use
Hmm.
cases, compliance. I mean, that's
Hmm.
pretty powerful to bring all these pieces together.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then, part of this is educating not just, your the government, but your team members as well, is showing them how to use the architecture, showing them how it was built, why things need to be built a certain way or integrated a certain way to be able to answer certain questions of the architecture, right? And so it's really educating them, informing them so that they know and start understanding how to utilize the EA. Because one day, as a contractor, you're not going to be there. There's going to be a new contractor coming in. And so it is our responsibility to work with the government, educate and inform them about our best practices, industry best practices, and making sure that they understand the product that they're getting.
You mentioned a couple of times about some of the benefits of that visualization. So that's interesting. I know a lot of decision makers sometimes get glossed over when it's in this word format or verbiage, just
Yeah.
too much verbiage, and they really can't see what that new state looks like.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that visualizing current versus new and those variations.
So I know I'm kind of breaking a golden rule where they say, don't ever build it and they will come, but sometimes you have to show them so they understand what it is they're getting. Right. And, configuring it in the tool or building all these models isn't necessarily the way to go. So again, we use Mural, and we use design sprints to actually do prototyping. So we do a lot of prototyping in the session. And then we actually have our person who actually develops the dashboards online with us and the stakeholders and the architects. And, as we're going through, he's actually configuring real time.
Oh, so in the back end, he's configuring the actual system
Yes.
while you're thinking about
Yes.
a new interface or a new connectivity between different systems. Okay.
Yes. So he's actually configuring real time. So in a matter of a day, he could turn around the actual prototype, the real implemented prototype, back to the government and say, is this what you want?
Oh,
Based on our design sprint session.
so I can imagine real data coming through
Right.
and different ways to show it, different
Right.
ways to do analysis on it. Yeah, that's what we thought everybody would be doing, right?
Right. Well,
In the
that's
past.
agile. That's
Yeah.
agile,
Yeah.
right? Right.
Yeah.
So just to give you an idea, uh, before we we used to with a different team, we would actually define the requirement, configure the tool or develop the dashboard, have stakeholder testing, user acceptance testing, technical testing, and moving it from the dev environment, impl, and prod would take 6 weeks. So for us now, our current process, it takes all in 2 weeks.
That's
We have
amazing.
2 week sprints. Yeah. Right. But that has a lot to do with the customer's mindset on delivering agile architecture, and agile product delivery, right? Minimal viable products. But it's also having a team of professionals that really know what they're doing. They really know the tools. I've worked with a set of the same architects for 23 years.
Oh, okay. That's a long time.
So
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. So David Rice is our tools expert. He has his own company, EA Frameworks, and he has worked with us for those 23 years, off and on in different projects. But when we all come together, we are working seamlessly. There's not a lot of dropping the ball. There's not a lot of miscommunications because we all know what the job is and what needs to get done.
The power
Right.
of teaming, drawing on an actual shared experience, as
Right.
opposed to the standard blah, like, hey, we have 1,000
Right.
years of experience. It's like, well, can you apply this to my problem now?
Right.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is that the younger people on the team benefit from these years of experience, and they see the dynamics of the more senior people and how they're working on the project, and they start to do and work those same behaviors They learn those best practices, those behaviors of communication, responsiveness, how to figure out how to get things done faster, higher quality. And that's all because of great teamwork and bringing diverse teams together, diverse experience, right? Diverse backgrounds, bringing them together.
Now, there's somebody else maybe in the adjacent field who's listening to this thinking, man, EA sound kind of cool here. Maybe they may have a different title, right? Infrastructure architect or some other engineering. They may think of the traditional professional certification for EA, but like you mentioned before, the difference between the academic side of EA and actual hands-on practical.
Yeah. I think that's the hardest part, because there's so many people thrown into these certification programs, and not to put anything down about the certification programs, but I cannot tell you enough how many times people have gone through the EA programs and certification programs and then come out of it and actually work on a high intensity EA program and are saying, this is nothing like what I learned. Okay. This is nothing what I learned, right? It's the same as the PMP certification, right? Very academic, it's all about formulas, but in the real world, they don't really teach you what actually goes on a program, right?
Interpersonal skills, leadership skills, communication skills.
Right.
Internal dynamics. It's like, oh, what's this extra stuff? I asked for information, I didn't get it. And that frustration can build. So it's almost like a mentorship path, maybe almost you need. Maybe junior people, like you said, that younger people are learning from you guys who are more experienced.
Yeah, so we do that on our program. We have a mentorship program on our team. We have brown bags where we actually learn things that are EA related, but not necessarily being performed on our project. Okay. So, for example, our current project does not require process simulation, but we are teaching that to our team so that they can leverage. They're not maybe doing process simulation, but some of the best practices around BPR and simulation, Lean Six Sigma, can be actually learned and actually implemented on a regular EA program. So that's why we're always trying to constantly train and innovate, making sure that they, and a lot of people get stuck on EA programs, they're, I'm guilty. I worked on a project of the DoD BEA program for 10 years. That's a long time for an EA program, right? But I held every job, every position on that program. And that's what gave me the experience moving forward on actually how to manage the EA program. So I primarily am the technical lead or the technical architect that's actually overseeing the technical implementations of EA, coming up with the methodologies and strategies and approaches. And I can do that just based on my firsthand hands-on experience in those positions.
So you've seen quite a bit. The challenges, ways to work around it.
Yeah.
Well, what are you seeing coming up here? So we've always got new challenges on the horizon. So you're looking at new tooling, new approaches, and maybe influx, maybe hopefully of younger people coming in here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are you seeing?
I think the thing is that in the future, I think we need to start investing in either the younger generation or the newer EA, architects that are coming into the system, and really investing the time and really getting them to understand what it is they really need to do, understanding the logic. I think many times architects don't spend enough time understanding the business so that they can architect that in their architecture. They're just focused on building models or loading data in and integrating it, but they're not really investing time in understanding the business or the systems. So that's an area that, we're also looking into, is investing that time. Again, I'm really interested in utilizing AI, anywhere where I can leverage technology to do work where I don't have to use a resource to do that work. I'm going to do it. Right. The other thing I wanted to also touch on is that, I think it's really important to build relationships with the vendors. So the tool vendors, they can be your make or break for a program. So building that relationship with them, and then working with them on any future enhancements that they might have for their tool. We have really great relationships with some of the vendors that we've worked with in the past. We've actually partnered with them to identify key enhancements that would not be just beneficial to us, but other federal agencies. So they're actually building those enhancements in their tools. So, we're working with them on their roadmap. One of the major areas that we're working on right now is 508 compliance, making sure that the tools are 508 compliance. So by us working with them, they're going to make sure that they're working with other clients the same to be 508 compliant.
You got a good feeling to actually be heard by the vendor, get inside their roadmaps, like, I'm going to need this capability.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we do a lot of innovative things on our EA programs. So they're interested in learning and understanding what we're doing and, building in those enhancements in their tools because they see that this could definitely be a need for other EA programs.
And then you mentioned about the younger folks understanding more of that business context. Like,
yeah,
you can imagine for healthcare outcomes is a huge thing, right? So no matter where you work in the org structure, realize this is what we're building while we're building it. At the end of the day, it's a patient or it's a military weapons system to help defend the country, or it's something else to help with processing taxes. Whatever these systems are for the government on the federal level, it's like there's people at the end of it. So I always like to have people like remember every once in a while, who's using this system, and if we can make the system more efficient, can we reduce the time that we can respond? Close out the time you got to wait in line, less paperwork, less stress on people themselves. There's a very, very powerful way to really ground yourself in what you're doing.
Right. And I think on the DoD BEA program, that was implemented very successful. So the architect was always assigned a subject matter expert. Okay. And for each group, there was essentially 4 or 5 subject matter experts. They all worked together, but there was a one-to-one relationship between the architect and the subject matter experts. So the group would come together and they would talk about the business. They would sit down and explain why it's important, the process of how it happens, what are the current issues and risks. So the architects are getting a full understanding of the business problems, right? And then they can start to see these are some of the potential, improvements you can make based on Lean Six Sigma, based on business process reengineering. You could even utilizing simulation. You can then go in and you can make those recommendations very easily, just from an architect standpoint. You don't have to be a subject matter expert. You can just clearly see the areas that you could potentially improve those processes, right?
Very nice.
Yeah.
So it's like it might be kind of cool to be work your way up to EA.
Yeah.
Career path.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I would. There are definitely areas that are. We definitely need tool experts. I think people who are doing tool configurations, developing dashboards or reports that are part of the tool suite, integration of those tools. We need more of those people in industry. Me personally, that's what I think.
Okay.
But those people need to have an EA background. They need to understand, frameworks. They need to understand business process reengineering. They need to know BPMN standards. They need to know all those things in order to understand how to configure the tool and how to make the recommendations back to the client. That's why we've had so much success, especially with David Rice. We've had so much success with him. Actually being able to make some very, very good recommendations that stick.
Yeah.
They're very strong recommendations. So, I think that's an area I think would be really, really great. And there's definitely a need for it in the industry.
I love it.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we haven't touched on during this conversation?
Yeah, I wanted to tell you about a scenario that happened with us on the US MEPCOM project. So US MEPCOM is essentially the military entrance processing center or command where new recruits come in to qualify to become a new recruit or to go into the military. So this is where you get your background investigation, your health examination, your testing, all of these things to qualify to go into the military. So we did a major business process reengineering effort on that process. And so, we were just going through the motions, developing the solution architecture, doing process simulation, doing all the integration, linking all the business rules, laws, policies, and regulations, and linking that into the architecture and delivering it to the client. And then we found out that GAO comes in and does a regular audit on their processes. So we actually built a capability where you could use an iPad and the auditor can come in and watch the process. So they could actually simulate the process to make sure that they're complying with the process. They can actually click on the process steps to see the rules around that process step and are they complying with those rules or those regulations. And then they could actually use that as part of their assessment or as part of their audit. And that just came by accident.
So instead of having to do it in the real world, you could actually do it inside the simulation.
Right. So that was really strong. I mean, a really great recommendation and, just another use of architecture that we didn't even think that was possible. And they could use it for that purpose, and they're also using it for governance. So anytime they want to make their change to a system, they just go to the architecture, they go in, and if they say they want to add a new interface, they can see what the impact is when they go in and add a new interface. They go to their governance board, shows them what the change is, and they approve it, and they're done.
Very powerful. Very powerful.
Yeah. It's exciting. There's a lot of things you can do with architecture. You just got to think outside the box a little bit, right?
I love it. I think this audience is probably pretty excited about what they've been hearing here today.
Yeah.
They're probably starting to Google EA and EA programs and simulation and business process reengineering.
Right.
So this is I just love this topic, this field, this profession.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we could probably go on forever, which would be cool. It might, it might need like a part 2 on this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe we can show you some stuff next time.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be cool.
Show EA in action, right?
I love it. Let's do it.
Right.
Well, Christal, we're going to close out for right now. Really, really great having you on the show today. Learned a lot. Cool person chatting with you on this topic here. And we'll be talking soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
All right. Now you take it easy.
Okay.
Now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. This has been another episode of the Smart IT Podcast. If you want more information, go to williamreed.info. And until next time. Thanks for joining another episode of the Smart IT Podcast, where we explore what's next for IT and disrupt the status quo, simplify the complex, and reduce risk together. If you like what you hear, please like, subscribe, and leave your comments. And for more Smart IT wisdom, check out my website at williamreed.info.